Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sophie Wadsworth, and it's lovely to see so many of you here for talking about how to tell funny stories. A hedgehog crashes a dinner party. And I am someone who has served as an executive leader for many years, a teacher in my past in high school and university, and now I am a coach and consultant who helps leaders write and speak their best stories and their best selves. So I'm very excited this morning to be on this not quite TED Talk to explore my thoughts around funny stories because I love to laugh and I always enjoy colleagues and leaders who make me laugh. And I hope this will give you some notions of how you might bring more humor into your day-to-day life or even make your colleagues crack up once in a while. So I've been thinking about stories, getting ready to talk to you today and what makes them funny. And I was trying to think first about my sister because all we do is laugh when we get on the phone. And what do we talk about? Well, she started swimming and she realizes she's not in her 20s anymore. And when she swings her arm out, she whacks the person next to her at the start. And she looks ridiculous in this wetsuit head to toe. And I thought, well, that's partly funny because it's about the goofiness of being human, right? And then I thought, well, yeah, what about me? And I thought, yeah, and how did I get my start in public speaking anyhow? And really, it was back when my sister and I were 8 and 9. And on Saturday mornings, we put on our tackle football gear. And we climbed down the front steps in New York City and got onto a van that was full of boys. And by the way, it's the 1970s, and my mother's feminist phase is in full swing. And the boys weren't really keen about having us on the bus. And so they said some rather not nice things. We'd go by a copper tone billboard ad with a very tan woman wearing, sort of the postage stamp style yellow bikini. And the boys would shout out, well, bet you never wear a suit like that. And I didn't know what to say. My sister and I, we're just there in our gear. Well, that night at home, my mom coached us. My first public speaking lesson. She said, whatever they say, just say it back twice and as loud as you can. Well, that was easy. I could remember that. So next time around, bet you never wear a suit like that. And then I would add scumbag just for effect. And that worked brilliantly. And there's something to that, how to be prepared. Now that's not about being funny. That's about defending yourself against bullies. So maybe that will be useful to you later in the day, wherever you work or in life. But what's funny about that is it's about me and the craziness of being human in my situation, right? So let's start with this hedgehog. A hedgehog crashes a dinner party. You've heard that routine for jokes, right? That a such and such walks into a such and such, right? So as I think about what makes a story funny, it's that you've got a character or a set of characters, and they are in some kind of a setting. They're in some place in the world. I'm in my football gear, in my pads, and I'm on a bus full of boys. And my sister is behind me. She's actually literally behind me while the boys are shouting things at us. And so that's it. The hedgehog crashes the dinner party. A person walks into a bar. That's the setup. So I offer you that in thinking about your stories. Just get that out of the way. The who and the where, and make it vivid if you can. Give us just enough detail we can see it. And then, of course, there's a problem. The boys on the bus, or the fact the hedgehog is at a dinner party is perhaps a problem. Maybe not for the hedgehog. And why hedgehogs? Well, I know you Brits love hedgehogs, and really, why? They're so dry out there. Oh, and I see, now we're getting a critter on the screen, a dog on the screen. yeah, it's so dry up there, just like North Africa where the hedgehogs are from. So it's just the perfect place to have hedgehogs. Um, so the idea of this character dropping into some other setting is maybe something you could use at work, because there's lots of industry jokes, right? So I'm going to share one from a book I love, that is called Funny Enough, Plato and Platypus Walk into a Bar. There's the setup, right? A philosopher and a creature. And by the way, animals are genius for humor. So here's the joke. Armed robbers burst into a bank and they line up the customers against the wall and they start to take their wallets and their watches and their jewelry. And two of the bank's accountants are among those waiting to be robbed. The first accountant suddenly thrusts something in the hand of the other. And the second accountant whispers, "What is this?" And the first accountant whispers back, "It's the $50 I owe you." So there's my accountant joke. And you notice I paused there, like, what in the world is he going to whisper back, before he gets shot? Well, that's just classic, because accountants, thank goodness, they keep all of the numbers straight. Nicola, you're laughing especially. I love it. So there's your setup. The robbers walk in. There's a couple of accountants, and what's going to happen next? So I ask you to think about your industry. You could Google it for starters, and this is a little tip for preparing. There really are industry jokes out there, not just for accountants. And see what you might come up with, because you can prepare to be funny. Now, some people are just funny nonstop, and they haven't prepared. They just find stuff to be funny about, right? So I'll give you a tip now about how a couple things that happen that call for a moment of humor when you're in a video meeting or a conversation or something. So this isn't so much a story, but just a humorous interlude. I could ask for a show of hands. How many of you have heard someone's cell phone go off in a live meeting or in a Zoom meeting? And you hear that ring, like it's, likely in the moment when you already feel you're about to lose your train of thought. Well, I've just started saying, listen, if that's Biden, you should answer it. We'll all hang on. Because it makes people laugh and everyone's listening to the ringing and going, oh gosh, and is my phone off? And it just kind of helps with the segue, right? And similarly, if your cat comes across the screen or whatever, you might have a line for that, right? I read a funny quip in a book by author Dory Clark. She's a business strategist and a wonderful writer. And she says, my cat has Zoom bombed so much in the last year that really it should get like an actor's equity card and an agent, because my cat's just been on Zoom all year. And it's fun to get ready for those moments when something like that happens, because it's going to happen. And then you can drop humor in that way. So I want to circle back now to me on the bus. And part of the reason it's funny is because it's sort of self-deprecating that, what in the world am I going to do as these guys are throwing insults at me? Abe Lincoln, by the way, was brilliant at self-deprecating humor, right? The person who said to him, you're like the ugliest, homeliest man I've ever seen, and he just said, well, maybe I should have stayed at home. He just loved to poke fun at himself, So he just knew how to use that material. And I think it just put everyone at ease, right? That he loved to share this one. I'm going to read you at an editor's banquet. This is in the mid 1800s. And he wasn't a journalist, so he felt very alienated. And so he compared himself to this ugly man riding a horse. And so this guy riding a horse, happens on this woman who says to him, well, you're the ugliest man I ever saw. And the man on the horse says, well, I can't help it. And she says, no, I suppose not, but you might stay at home or show the other side of your face. And so think about the things that are goofy, or let's just say imperfect about yourself, and how you might bring them into a conversation and tell a story about it. So I offer you that. And it can just be a fun way to reflect back on your day or your life. And yeah, think about how you're going to make your colleagues laugh, because it humanizes us, right? It gives everyone this feeling of like, oh yeah, she's like me, that she's in the car and she realizes she has oatmeal on her shirt, right? And her phone is at home, right? Yeah. And she's messing with this, and then there's the car, and then someone's honking at her, and it just gets worse from there, and it builds. And you can elaborate. It's your story, you know, you can make it worse, right? Yeah. Um, so one of my secret loves is poetry. And as I was thinking about funny stories, I thought of a funny poet named Billy Collins. And one of his poems I love is an example of a list poem where it builds a list. Walt Whitman is a tremendous poet who's not especially funny, but romantic and lyrical and takes you into another world, who builds these lists. So Billy Collins builds a list around nostalgia. And I offer this as a way of thinking about piling things up. It gets more absurd as it goes on. And I'm going to share a little bit of it with you. So this poem titled Nostalgia begins, remember the 1340s? We were doing a dance called the catapult. And you always wore brown, the color craze of the decade. And I was draped in one of those capes that were popular. And then later he goes on, well, where is the summer of 1572 gone? You know, brocade and sonnets and marathons were the rage. And then the 1790s will never come again. And even this morning would be an improvement on the present moment. So he builds like that. And I thought, well, what if I wanted to tell a funny story about the pandemic and build on it and build a list? Remember the spring of 2020? We were doing elbow bumps and working from home. You always wore a mask, the accessory of the season. And I washed the groceries after we took them out of the bags. And what about the fall of 2020 when the kids played Minecraft during remote school and we wore pajama bottoms to meetings? And we spoke of contact tracing and the supply chain, and vaccinations were all the rage, or the source of rage. And Fauci was everyone's, or almost everyone's, hero. And we had lawn signs for nurses with big hearts on them. I especially love the fall of 2021, when to mask or not to mask was the question. And restaurants set up tables in the middle of suburban main streets with barricades, and everyone watched the great resignation unfold at work. So I just was playing with that idea of how do you riff on something you love from someone else who's funny. So think about your favorite comedians, think of your favorite bits, think about a list that exaggerates as it goes on, maybe gets more absurd, and how you might use that to share a funny story. And maybe you combine all of those. Maybe it's about you personally and things getting crazier and crazier over time. So that's another way we can think about the structure of a funny story. And I'll be curious in the Q&A to hear if you all have favorite comedians or poets that you might want to share. But that's one of the best ways to get funnier, is hear what makes you laugh and what makes something funny when someone else is speaking. Some of it is timing, right? Having that pause. Almost as if you've just thought of it. And remember fall of 2020. Yeah. So that's part of how you can prepare to be funny, is build out material for yourself plan jokes from your industry that you know will make your colleagues laugh. Think about who the funny people are in your life and just share their material with other people. A friend yesterday described discovering something from a family member's journal, who talked about writing as a mother, and a very busy mother at that, on an ironing board. And I thought that was so hilarious that you might find a piece of journaling that somebody has done in the craziness of motherhood written on an ironing board. And so you can listen for these details and think about how might you just weave them into your day. You know, I wrote this on the back of a napkin while I was waiting at the taco truck. There's grease on it, but here's my strategic plan for the months to come. I'll never forget when a consultant colleague said to me that they were working with a client, and the client described a scenario like this of writing stuff on a napkin in a meeting, you know, glass of wine, fancy table. And the consultant said, well, that's the beginning of a great story for your team. And the client, this, you know, CEO said, oh, no, I won't share the part about the napkin and the restaurant. And yet there's the story. You're in a place, you've got the napkin, there's a scene, and suddenly the beginning of the strategic plan comes to her. And that makes everyone lean forward. Well, what happens next? What's on the napkin? And it's so much more interesting than just saying, here's my vision for the next 3 months, because you've made it a story, and maybe you can even make it something funny. The waiter comes over and I say, no, just wait. And then I keep writing on the napkin. You know, you can embellish, right? As you go. So I think with that, I want to say, go out there and be funny. Listen for what cracks you up. Source jokes about your industry and comedians you love. Let me know what you find so I can get funnier. And let's shift now to Q&A. And thank you all for listening.